We'll call the member for Fadden.
Mr Deputy Speaker, before I make some comments on the flood levy and with the concurrence of the government, I wish to actually acknowledge some new student leaders within the schools in Fadden. I actually believe it's quite important, especially at a time of debating large national issues, that the Commonwealth recognises the roles and responsibilities of young leaders as they seek to represent our nation and in future make some of the big and heady decisions that we debate here this evening. These leaders in Fadden have been selected by their schools for their potential to make a positive and lasting contribution to their school and to the wider community. These young leaders play an important role. Their actions have the potential to influence their peers, and that influence should not be understated within the school community. I encourage these new leaders to recognise the need for true leadership and view the opportunity they've been given as a stepping stone to a greater and broader role in our community. Great leadership is at the heart of all achievement, all advancement and the betterment of society. Nothing will ever replace great leadership, and nothing can fill the void that the absence of leadership makes. I urge these students, as Australia's young emerging leaders, to strive to achieve their very best in their current roles, though their influence, they will now carry this torture responsibility. Winston Churchill once said to his old school in 1941, "Never give in. Never, 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 nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honour and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy." Well, I say to these young student leaders in the Northern Gold Coast schools, don't give in. Give it your all. You can do it. Above all, I say to these young leaders, remember well that you can only truly lead by serving those you represent. And this rule is universally without exception. I regularly visit the schools whose leaders I'm able to table and talk about today. I'm welcomed by the members of the school leadership group, and I'm universally impressed by the young people of these schools. The calibre of the young people of this nation, and indeed the Northern Gold Coast, is of an extraordinarily high level, and I'm proud of each and every one of them. I'm pleased to seek leave to table the names of Fadden's school leaders today, knowing they have an important task ahead of them, and I look forward to watching their leadership journey with interest.
Seeking leave to table. Leave granted. Leave is granted.
I thank the Parliamentary Secretary of the desk. I now move on to lend some comments on the levy. I am a Queenslander, a proud Queenslander at that. We've all been touched, especially since my electorate is only some tens of kilometres away from where much of the devastation occurred. I was recently speaking in the House about the role that our military played, especially on that fateful night of the Tuesday, the 11th of January, where Black Hawks 201, 220 and 2 Seahing helicopters did the most amazing rescues, rescuing some 300 people, with Black Hawk 201 rescuing 146 people. Up to 1,900 Defence Force personnel, fighting men and women, came to the aid of our communities over the entire period of the Queensland floods, and more assisted further south down in Victoria. There is no question that we as a parliament seek to help and to serve and to mend the people of Queensland. We seek to do all we can. The government has announced that $5.6 billion will be required as they match with their 75% of all the funding to assist the recovery. There is no quibble from the opposition as to the quantum of funds. No quibble at all. We wish to see the money spent quickly, wisely, with great accountability to go to those most in need. We are thankful that the likes of Major General Mick Slattery, DSC, is put in command of the Recovery Task Force. A man of great honour, of great courage and great capability. He's a wise choice as a leader. There is no dispute from the coalition as to the need for funds, as to the need for leadership, as to the speed of the operation ahead. There's only one point on which we beg to differ. That's how the funds are to be raised. The Coalition has indicated its support for the reconstruction and repair effort. We've further offered to have the Leader of the Opposition work in a bipartisan manner with the Prime Minister to find necessary cost savings. The government has rejected the offer, as is their wont. We've also released $2.065 billion of potential savings in our own forward estimates as an alternative to $1.8 billion being raised with the flood levy. We've sought to be responsible, to show alternatives. We do this based on the premise that we do not believe another levy or tax is warranted. We believe the Commonwealth Government should rise to the example, to realise its responsibilities to assist the states when they indeed have encountered natural disaster. But we believe that this is best done through proper, sound fiscal management. If I can draw a simple analogy, if my washing machine is suddenly blown up, the tyres are suddenly bald, or something goes wrong in my house, I don't go around and tax the neighbours to fix it. I use savings. I use spare capacity in my household budget to do it. I always say to my young school leavers and those at school in the electorate of Fadden, a budget of a nation runs not dissimilar to that of a home. We live within our means. There is a time and a place to borrow money for assets that will achieve and significantly increase worth, for those to be paid off quickly. There is a limited time for significant asset borrowing, but it is limited. There is no time for reckless spending. There is no time for continual and sustained budget deficits. There is a time for repaying debt quickly and living within your means. For if you are within your means, you have the capacity to address issues. Here we have a need for $1.8 billion that the federal government is taxing Australians to raise. What happened to a contingency in the budget to deal with these? What happened to a budget surplus and money in the bank to deal with these issues? What happened to having a capacity to deal with these issues? I don't begrudge the quantum of the expenditure, but I do take issue with a government that is not doing enough hard yards to cut its expenditure to deal with the critical needs of the nation at large. The economic consensus, I believe, is quite clear. The Economics Committee, of course, heard from the likes of Mr Eastlake and Professor McGibbon, who were clear in their view that the government's new tax was the least preferred policy response. Professor McGibbon, a member of the board of the Reserve Bank, said, "I think that in the case of a disaster, it is almost uniformly accepted by economists, in principle, that a tax is not the best way to fund it." He further said, "I am sure that there are Queenslanders out there who had no insurance, who incurred significant damage and did not receive any assistance from the government. They will now be hit with the levy." The levy is payable in 2011-12 financial year, $1.795 billion across the forward estimates. The challenge is, though, that in question time, the Treasurer was unable to answer exactly how many people would be paying the levy. I therefore find it difficult to know how he can come to the quantum of $1.795 billion when he doesn't know the number who'll be paying for it. If the question is asked, how should the government fund this? The average Australian is quite clear. The government has recklessly spent billions and billions of dollars. Right now it's currently borrowing $100 million a day. $100 million a day. 18 days of their borrowing would cover the levy. 2.5 weeks, that's all that would cover it. If you look at the wasteful spending, $2.5 billion on pink bats, with 150 houses burnt and 4 people tragically killed. You look at the school halls program, with estimates up to half of it wasted. But if you just looked at Brad Orgwell's work that he did, and you looked at the difference in what they got per square metre for private schools and public schools, the difference is $2.7 billion. And you know the tragic thing about the school hall wasted program is the Labor Party that stands there and says that we're here for public education allowed the state Labor governments and bureaucracies to gouge those schools to the point where it is beyond doubt from the government's own task force that state schools got a much lesser deal than private schools. Those the Labor government sought to serve, they indeed screwed over a barrel. It is truly one of the great tragedies and travesties of public policy. A minimum of $2.7 billion wasted. If we look at the NBN, something like $50 billion of public funds about to be spent, some of which, with $500 million in the budget for the NBN presently, could be used for the levy. Yet President Obama has come out to spend $7 billion with a 4G network with a wireless solution. Vietnam is moving to an advanced 4G network, but oh no, Even though 7-to-1 take-up is wireless over fixed in this country, we're still walking down the solution that was hatched in a plane with Senator Conroy and former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, because the $4.7 billion solution had folded and Labor quickly needed a patch-up job. We also look no further than the budget blowout in the Immigration Department. On 10th of February 2001, the government introduced a bill to provide an extra $290 million for operational costs associated with the management of offshore asylum seekers. The new spending represents a budget blowout of more than 60% on the $470 million already budgeted for in the current year. In 2011 or 10-11, the government will now spend $760 million on people arriving illegally in Australia. This compares to less than $100 million in annual expenditure when the Howard government left office in 2007. The total budget blowout since Labor rolled back the strong border protection regime in August 2008 as a statement of fact, the total budget blowout is more than $1.4 billion and counting. $1.4 billion. And if you're in Afghanistan and an Afghani in a camp on the border of Kazakhstan, you have a 1 in 10 chance of your application to come to Australia being received and processed. If you come by boat, you have a 97% chance. That's a statement of fact. So we have $1.4 billion in budget blowout because this government rolled back the border protection policies. If the spending continues at the level announced in 10th of February 2011 over the forward estimates for the next 3 years, that'll mean an additional $1.9 billion in expenditure, enough to cover the flood levy. I could go on and on with the disastrous green loan programs, solar flagships overblown by over $1 billion, and the list of waste and mismanagement continues ad nauseum. But rather than address the issue of waste and mismanagement, this government has taken the easy route. It has taken the route of a tax. And that is what is most disappointing here. The Coalition has no issue with funding the quantum. The issue we have today and tonight as we debate the bill is that we do not believe Australians should be taxed because a government cannot control its budget.